All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm delighted today to have the opportunity to interview Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, who is an MD and a PhD and really been one of my mentors for the last 15 years or so, and really helped me understand some basic foundational truths of natural medicine and basically how we can use the body's healing forces and to help encourage and inspire and motivate us to really high levels of health and to address some of the diseases that really seem, unfortunately, to hit so many of us, even though we're seeking to lead healthy lives and lifestyles. So what I'd like to do is have Dr. Klinghardt review some of his history so you have an understanding of where he's come from and how he came to his understanding, because he's really widely regarded by many in this field as one of the pioneer leaders. So I'm just delighted to have him today. So welcome. If you can just explain to our listeners your journey in health and help them understand where you've got to where you're at now and help them understand some of your philosophy. I think they greatly appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. So, I could start this from two angles. One angle is that I was born in the after-war years in Germany and grew up in relative poverty and relatively poor health, and sort of struggled myself to regain solid, robust health for a long period of time, and learned a lot in the course of that. The other side of that is that when I went to medical school, I was part of an experimental program that I really appreciate more and more. Like, we had, during the 5.5 years of medical school, we had to enroll in a 2-year program in learning classical homeopathy, which was also then part of our final exams. And I took an elective during that time, also a 2-year elective in acupuncture. So I had the unusual fortune to graduate from medical school also having very good working knowledge in acupuncture and homeopathy. And the following years after medical school took me, through residency training, but they also took me to India to study for 2 years in India, learning Ayurvedic medicine and the principles of that. Forgetting most of that over the following years, but I had a very a very robust training in many disciplines that have only now come to the forefront being appreciated. When I came to the U.S. in 1982, very few patients had a working sort of understanding of acupuncture. That was just the new kid on the block in those days. Homeopathy had all but been killed, around the turn of the century, 1910, 1920, and really hadn't begun to be a respectable science, which it is now, 30 years later. And so I entered the U.S. with a quite good working knowledge of alternative types of medicine, and then when I settled here, becoming familiar with the things that are good over here, chiropractic, osteopathy that was unknown in Europe. And so I engaged in quite a bit of study in manipulative medicine during the first few years while I was here to complete what I was doing, and then moved on from there. And unfortunately, what also moved on is not just me learning new stuff, but also illnesses changed in their presentation quite dramatically. Today we see much more colorful pictures of complex chronic illnesses than we ever did, much of that being caused by the ever-increasing amount of toxicity, the exposure to the electrosmog from the cell phone broadcasting, and the effect of chronic infections, which are constantly changing and presenting in ever new ways, such as Lyme disease, which may appear in 1,000 different faces. And so I'm using my training that I've had and apply it to these new illnesses, and have come up with a pretty good understanding of how to diagnose and how to treat many of these patients that are affected in these fairly new ways.
Well, that's a very interesting point that you bring up, and something I've been aware of, but I tend to forget, and I think many of our listeners may not fully appreciate, is that it's not that, well, many diseases are the same. I think heart disease isn't changing much, but the infectious component is morphing in a way in response to the toxins that were exposed to, that you referenced, as the cell phones and the different environmental chemicals that are manufactured that did not exist, and this influx of mercury into the environment, which is really only in the last 50, 60 years or so that we've seen that. So there's these incredible exposure to toxins, which has really changed the disease patterns that we've seen, so that applying some of the basic simple principles we do, the sort of the foundational lifestyle nutrition plans, would have been enough, 100 years ago, if a person followed that, but the game has changed. The game has changed, and we need really experts who understand health and physiology at a very deep level to understand the interactions and to develop new strategies to combat these shifts, because it's a brand new ballgame.
Absolutely. I'm always saying, and this is not meant as a joke, it used to be the selection of the strongest and fittest, and today it's the selection with those patients that have the best genes controlling the mechanisms of detoxification, and there may be very wimpy looking little guys, with very sloping shoulders and crooked legs, but they may have the good detox genes, and they're the ones that are going to reign the world very soon. Yeah, so it has changed, but starting with heart disease, 100 years ago there was no heart disease. Heart disease very clearly also is an outcome of toxicity, but once established, it has stayed pretty firmly stable. Lead toxicity playing a huge role in all the forms and pictures of heart disease. And fortunately, that's the exposure to lead is slightly decreasing over the last 20 years, and so is heart disease. It's kind of moving a little back, but everything else is marching forward, like autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. All the neurological diseases are increasing. We're estimating that the number of children born to be later diagnosed with autism is doubling about every 5 years now. It's very, very scary.
Yeah, it really is. It's kind of shocking the way that has really exploded. But again, it's not only the toxins that are an issue, but really the shift in our diet, because the vast majority of the American public is choosing to eat processed foods, and foods that didn't exist 50, 60 years ago. And a classic example of this, and one of the really primary targets we're focusing on for 2010 is fructose. It is just devastating. This did not exist before 1970 at least as high fructose corn syrup, and it just massively destroys impairs insulin resistance and a whole variety of other pathologies, which in combination to these altered infectious agents just makes a synergy that is just profoundly challenging to overcome. So you've developed a number of different strategies over the years, and as a result of really an insight as to how the body works. And I think, from my perspective, one of your major contributions to health is this autonomic response testing. And I'd like you to go over that a little bit, because I think you've done your PhD in Germany in the autonomic nervous system. And then you were really one of the first medical physicians who explored muscle testing that was developed in this country by a chiropractor, Dr. George Goodhart, who developed applied kinesiology. But you've taken that and really taken it a whole different level. And it's this tool that you can use that can really serve as an efficient, not efficient, but effective way to assess what's going on and really understand how different interventions can influence the pathology. So that's the challenge, because traditional medicine doesn't have any good testing to figure these things out, and that's really why I think you've really taken the science to a new level because of your diagnostic capabilities with this, ART. So I think our listeners would really appreciate your understanding, your explanation of that.